on the Hawkeyes Sports Network from Learfield. This is the Fight for Iowa podcast, brought to you by Athletico Physical Therapy, proud partner of the Iowa Hawkeyes and the Big Ten Conference. Iowa's corn farmers of the Iowa Corn Growers Association and Iowa Corn Promotion Board. You may think Iowa grows corn, but the truth is, corn grows Iowa. Shields, we're right there with you in Des Moines, Sioux City, Iowa City, and Cedar Falls. University of Iowa Healthcare. Changing medicine, changing lives. This is the Fight for Iowa podcast. Here's the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin.
With the opening ceremony now complete, the Olympic Games are underway in Paris. 11 current or former Hawkeye student athletes are competing over the next several weeks. Soccer and rugby have kicked things off. In 2014, Iowa grad Chloe Lacassie is the Hawkeyes' first soccer Olympian and will compete for Canada. Lacassie is the career leader for shots on goal with 306, scoring 112 points on 46 goals and 26 assists. Basketball is well represented with Megan Gustafson competing for Spain, Tomi Taiwo with Nigeria, and men's star Peter Jock will wear the colors of South Sudan. Then there's former Hawkeye wrestling great Spencer Lee. Lee will go to the mat the first week in August at 57 kilograms. Lee becomes the 20th Hawkeye wrestling Olympian. The last was Thomas Gilman, who won bronze at Tokyo in 2020. Lee went 4-0 at the World Olympic Games qualifier, including a victory over the top seed from China. He's got the same attitude in Paris. Doesn't matter who he draws.
The matchup I wanted, he's not even allowed to go to the tournament, so I wrestle anyone. So when I said before is that I'd like to wrestle every single guy in the bracket, but unfortunately you only get to wrestle at the most 3 or 4. So oh well, you can only wrestle what they put in front of you, and you got to take advantage of it one match at a time. So I feel like I've been representing the U.S. and Iowa no matter what, both the same way. Like trying to be the best in the country, you're trying to prove that you're the best so you can go represent in the future. So I think that it's the same, but it's good. It's awesome. I mean, I'm honored to have the U.S. flag on my back and to have the country represent, me represent the country and have them care about my performance. So I'm excited. I think no matter what, this is like part of me, part of who I am. It's where I train. It's who I'm coached by.
Iowa coach Tom Brands admires the 3-time NCAA champion and twice College Wrestler of the Year for his grit in battling through a variety of injuries in reaching the wrestling summit.
The thing is he's had opportunities and he's seized them very strongly. He's put, emphasis on the most important competitions, and I don't know if there's any more important than this one coming up. So you're talking about a guy who is a super high-octane competitor. You're talking about a guy who gets up for the best events that are in front of him, and here we are. It's time to perform. It's not something where you don't talk about that because we don't want to get him worked up too much. He knows that. That's what he's all about, and that's what he's here for.
Brands adds that Lee's attitude has never changed. Score points. Lee went 98-6 at Iowa, winning 2 Dan Hodge trophies for College Wrestler of the Year. A side note, Iowa men's wrestling led the nation in attendance for a 17th consecutive year. The Hawks drew an average of 14,847 fans for 6 dual meets at Carver Hawkeye Arena, all sellouts. Up next on the Fight for Iowa podcast, one of the most recognizable logos and perhaps the brightest colors of any university joins the Big Ten. Our program is sponsored by Athletico, UIHC, Shields, and Iowa Corn.
More of the Fight for Iowa podcast after this.
When it comes to your health, you need the full picture. That means the right diagnosis and the right treatment right from the start. I'm Aaron Bowes, pediatric neurologist with University of Iowa Healthcare. Here, we're working together every day to advance medicine so you can get the best care. With more research, more clinical trials, and more treatment options than anywhere else in the state, the University of Iowa Healthcare is changing medicine and changing lives. Learn more at uihc.org.
To anyone passing through our state, fields and fields of corn might be what they see. But the people who call Iowa home No, it's so much more. Corn is ethanol, a homegrown, renewable fuel. Corn is delicious pork, beef, poultry, and dairy. Corn is in 4,000 products we rely on every day. So yeah, our highway views are full of corn, and we're proud of it. Because corn grows Iowa. Show your support for Iowa corn farmers at iowacorn.org/fan of corn.
Are aches, pains, or injuries keeping you on the sidelines? At Athletico, our movement experts are here to help you turn your setbacks into comebacks and create a personalized game plan for your recovery. With no prescription or referral needed, Athletico Physical Therapy is where your comeback story begins. Get started today by scheduling a free assessment at athletico.com. Proud partner of the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Now back to the Fight for Iowa podcast. Here's the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin.
The Oregon Ducks enter the Big Ten Conference with former Pac-12 brethren Southern Cal, UCLA, and Washington this fall. Under fourth-year head coach Dan Lanning, Oregon was 12-2 and 8-1 last season, losing to Washington in the conference title game. If Purdue is the cradle of quarterbacks, the Ducks aren't far behind. From Dan Fouts to Marcus Mariota and Achilles Smith, Joey Harrington, and Justin Herbert in between. The Ducks score a ton of points. They averaged 44 last season with a much-improved defense. Dylan Gabriel is under center this year and is a Heisman candidate. The Ducks don't play Iowa this season, but the Hawkeyes host them in 2025. Oregon's inaugural Big Ten catalog includes the opener with UCLA, and then hosting Michigan State and Ohio State back-to-back. Later, there's a trip to Michigan. Joey McMurray works the sidelines for the Oregon Radio Network broadcasting team. McMurray acknowledges there's been some hand-wringing with the demise of the Pac-12 and the new frontier ahead. But with the Ducks' pedigree, there's plenty of excitement with the Big Ten throwing out the welcome mat.
We all know that money is a driving force of college athletics now. And as college athletics has become much more national rather than regional, I think we kind of all saw this coming. So fans who I think are diehards and have really been paying attention to the money and where things are going, I don't think that it was a surprise. And I think there's a lot of excitement to be playing against the Iowas of the Big Ten right now. That being said, there are still fans that I've heard of that are like, man, we had it pretty good with the regionalization of college athletics. And there are people that are upset that Oregon and Oregon State are not in the same conference. There are people that are upset that rivalry may not be played every year in every sport just based on scheduling. I mean, I'd like to think personally that in the baseball, softball, soccer, volleyball, you should be able to figure it out in those. And in basketball, I think you can figure it out. You know, I've been a proponent that maybe the last game before Christmas every year should just be the rivalry game. Maybe the men and women, the women are in Corvallis, the men are here each year, sort of a thing. Who knows what Coach Altman and Coach Graves, at least on our end, are going to figure that about that. But in football, look, I mean, those two teams are probably not going to play against each other every year for the next decade. We will play each other the next 2 years, but beyond that, there's non-conference contracts. And as we said, money is obviously a thing. So, you know, that's just one example, I think, of some of us around Oregon that are like, boy, that does kind of stink. But that being said, I mean, look around realignment over the last 30 years. I think of Colorado and Colorado State. They've been able to figure it out over time. You know, they've played against each other every year. And so there's ways to do it.
And you just look back to last season, 12-2, could have easily would have been in the expanded playoff format. Certainly there were those arguing for Oregon last year. Dan Lanning has done a tremendous job in the 2-3 short years he's been there, came out of a great program in Georgia. So that national brand has reached both coasts, and now the Big Ten will be on both coasts. But let's talk about this team coming up this year. Now the Hawks and the Ducks don't play this coming season, but it will happen down the road. Bo Nix last year, who's going to be under center this year? Dylan Gabriel came in from Oklahoma. He would be, at least on the surface, the odds-on favorite.
Yeah, I think that's probably the smart answer to that question. But I will tell you, in the spring, Dante Moore, the transfer from UCLA, he started some games for Chip Kelly at UCLA. Dante Moore was heavily recruited by Oregon, ended up coming to Oregon through the transfer portal anyway. Another example of the modern era of college athletics where recruiting never stops. If you don't get him as a freshman, you might get him as a sophomore or a junior or a senior or a fifth year at this point. And Dante Moore, I think, will push Dillon Gabriel. I think, though, that the odds-on favorite, just look at the workforce or the workload, I should say, that Dillon Gabriel's had in college athletics. He's actually a very similar story to Bo Nix. I mean, Bo Nix set a record for the most starts for a collegiate quarterback last year as a career, not just, in one season in a career. Now, the COVID year has something to do with that. I get all that, but man, Dillon Gabriel's played a lot of football. There's nobody else coming into this season that's got more passing yards in college football than Dillon Gabriel. So, yeah, he's got to be the odds-on favorite. I mean, maybe look no further than a lot of your fans, I'm sure, like ours, are excited that there's a college football video game for the first time in over a decade. And, well, Dillon Gabriel is at the top of the depth chart on the roster they put together for whatever that means. So, I think that he'll be the one. And he's got a very similar story to Bo Nix. He kind of ends up at Oregon as maybe the crowning jewel of his career. And that's what Duck fans are hoping for. If the Ducks are going to realize some national title hopes, certainly the quarterback makes a big difference.
What gets lost, I mean, Oregon scores semi-loads of points every game out. This was a program that was also top 10 in scoring defense, allowing 19 points a game last year. Dan Lanning, was a defensive coordinator, won a national championship at Georgia. So he knows something about defense, too. Talk about the balance of this year's team. I know you were awfully good last year. How much of that talent comes back? You make a great point with the transfer portal. Rosters are changing seemingly by the minute.
Yeah, they are. And I think, maybe the defense really reloaded. The defense, particularly up front last year, was very, very old and very experienced. And the secondary is where they supplemented with the transfer portal. Well, they've gone and gotten a lot of new additions at a couple different big spots. A few of them are Big Ten transfers, a Michigan State transfer up front, for example. And, I think
you got a former Hawkeye there, Justin Jacobs,
right.
Linebacker.
And Justin was hurt for most of last year. And a lot of fans, I don't think realize he and Jeff Bassa were going to be 1 and 2. And Jeffrey Bassa returns. He's really the spiritual and in a lot of ways the on-field leader for this team.
What's your sense about this Oregon team and how it fits in this expanded college football playoff system?
Well, one, I'm excited about the expanded college football playoff because it means that we get postseason games at home sites. I think that's really cool. I know there was so much discussion about, what do you do with the tradition of bowl games? And I'll be honest. I mean, I'm a believer that we got to a point where there were way too many bowl games. And when players weren't playing in some of these bowl games, I don't think that it made a lot of sense other than it's an excuse to give teams an extra 15 practices in December. So I personally was a fan of, let's just say that teams can practice in December. They can practice even if they're not in a bowl game. And then let's ring that back in a little bit. Let's rein that back in. And I think the college football playoff is sort of the beginning of that because you're not having, for example, and I hate to call them this because we've played in a lot of what people would say are tier 2 bowl games that are just next level experiences. The Alamo Bowl has been very good to the Ducks. The Holiday Bowl recently. I mean, the list goes on. And I don't know how you feel, Gary. I'd be curious for your perspective on that too. I like it because you get more football on home fields, and that's what makes college sports so special in my mind.
Quarterback Dillon Gabriel replaces All-American Bo Nix and brings eye-popping numbers with him from Oklahoma, where he was a unanimous All-Big 12 selection. With a year of eligibility remaining, Gabriel has thrown for 14,800 yards and 125 touchdowns. His 152 career scores is tied for 4th in NCAA history. Football season is coming fast with the Hawkeyes opening camp this week. The annual Kids Day at Kinnick, presented by Stead Family Children's Hospital, is Saturday, August 10th, with autograph signings occurring around 10:30 along the front of the west and south end zone stands. Admission is free, with complimentary parking on designated hard surface lots. That's our show for this week. I'm Gary Dolphin. Thanks for listening, as always, to the Fight for Iowa podcast.
You've been listening to the Fight for Iowa podcast. Hawkeye fans, remember to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. Once you become a Fight for Iowa podcast subscriber, you'll automatically receive the latest episodes of the Fight for Iowa podcast, the Hawkeye Women Rise podcast, Hawk Talk replays, exclusive game content, and more. Until next time, on Iowa and go Hawks! The preceding has been a Learfield presentation on the Hawkeye Sports Network.